Story 1. Something in the dark was running with us. I never planned a hunt that morning. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend, my wife, kids, and I at my parents' old ranch out in the middle of nowhere. A place where you could hear the wind through the trees better than the buzz of your own phone. Usually, I loved it. But this time, my wife brought her parents along, and that ruined everything. Her mother. God. Within hours, I felt like I was trapped in a pressure cooker. The passive-aggressive remarks. The condescending looks. I couldn't take it anymore. By 4 a.m., I'd had enough. I grabbed my gear, scribbled a quick note for my wife, and left. I didn't care about catching anything. I didn't even care if I saw a single deer. I just needed to breathe. I borrowed my dad's old bolt-action rifle and headed into the woods. The sky was still black, and the air was cold enough to bite. My boots crunched against the frost-covered ground. The silence was thick, and the trees stood like quiet sentinels watching me pass. After about 20 minutes of walking, I reached an old wooden blind I used to use as a teenager. It creaked under my weight as I climbed up, but it held. I sat down, leaned back against the wooden wall, and let the silence wrap around me like a blanket. I felt the tension drain from my chest. I could finally be alone. Eventually, my eyelids grew heavy. I figured I'd rest until the sun came up. Maybe take a real nap. Just as I was drifting off, I heard something. It was subtle at first. A low, guttural sound. At first I thought it was a deer coughing, or maybe a fox. But the longer I listened, the more wrong it sounded. Like laughter and choking all at once, wet, broken, and disturbingly human. I sat up straight, my skin crawling. I grabbed the rifle and carefully looked out through the gap in the boards. There was barely any light, but enough to catch a flicker of movement. Something or someone darted between two trees, about 60 yards away. I raised the scope and scanned the tree line. All I saw was the tail end of a pale shape disappearing behind a trunk. It moved on all fours, fast, almost insect-like. My pulse quickened. Woo! I stayed frozen, watching the woods, waiting for it to show itself again. But nothing happened. Just silence. No coughing, no laughter, no birds. The forest had gone dead still. I whispered to myself, "It's just an animal." But it didn't feel like that. Something was off. Deeply off. Still gripping the rifle, I slowly sat back and waited for the sun to rise. I tried to shake it off. Probably a sick coyote or raccoon, maybe even a bear. But I couldn't get that sound out of my head. That awful choking laugh. As the sky finally began to brighten, I convinced myself it was all in my head. I hadn't slept much the night before. My nerves were fried. The forest always plays tricks on tired minds. Trying to reset, I pulled out my little camping stove. I wasn't planning to stay long, but coffee was non-negotiable. I got the water heating and munched on some trail mix while I waited. The stove hissed softly, so quiet. I could still hear every crack of twig and whisper of wind outside. Then, another sound. Movement. Not leaves or wind steps. Heavy ones. Close. I froze, every instinct in my body screaming. Slowly, I reached for the rifle and moved toward the gap in the blind again. I peered out. Nothing. Just trees and low mist curling along the ground. Then to the right, this time, another crack. I turned quickly. Again, nothing. But it was closer. Way closer. My mouth was dry. I backed away from the opening, rifle still in hand, trying to control my breathing. That's when I heard a soft thud right outside the door. The blind only had one entrance, a short wooden door with a latch I hadn't even bothered to lock. I stepped toward it quietly, holding my breath. My fingers hovered over the latch. Something shifted on the other side. I slowly, silently peered through the narrow crack between the boards, and I saw a face. Peeking from behind a tree about 30 feet away was an old manor, at least something wearing the skin of one. He was bald except for a few long, greasy wisps of gray hair. His gums were exposed, no teeth just slick, red flesh. His skin looked like wax left too close to fire, and he was smiling. Not just smiling, grinning with wide, ecstatic eyes like he just spotted something he loved. Me. My knees nearly buckled. I stepped back so fast I knocked over the camp stove. Boiling water spilled across the wooden floor, scalding my leg through my pants. I hissed in pain, turned the stove off in a panic, and looked back at the door. The man was already there. No sound, no footsteps. He was just there, his face inches from the door's crack. His smile hadn't changed. Then, slowly, he reached out and pushed the door open. He didn't rush, didn't lunge. He just stepped inside like he belonged there. And the worst part? He didn't come for me. He dropped to all fours and started eating the spilled trail mix off the floor. No chewing, no hands. He licked it up like a starving dog, and I just stood there, rifle in my hands, frozen, watching this thing scarf down every crumb with raw desperation. I couldn't move. My brain screamed at me to raise the rifle, to run, to do something, but my body wouldn't listen. The man, if I could still call him, that was hunched down, licking the floor with an obscene kind of hunger. His tongue dragged over the wood, sticky and wet, collecting crumbs and spilled chili like he hadn't eaten in weeks. His ribs poked through his paper-thin skin. His spine jutted out like jagged rocks under the surface, and the only thing he wore was a pair of filthy, torn briefs. I remember thinking, how did he even get out here? We were miles from anything. No towns, no houses, no signs of hikers. Even if he were homeless, surviving out here would be nearly impossible. Unless he wasn't surviving. Unless something else kept him alive. And then, he looked at me. That same wide smile. Those gleaming, wet gums. His head tilted sideways like a confused dog, and for a few seconds we just stared at each other. Then he started crawling toward me, on all fours. Elbows bent weirdly, legs dragging slightly. His mouth still open. That awful moist gurgling sound coming from deep in his throat. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a voice. It was just wrong. I scrambled backward into the corner of the blind, lifting the rifle. My hands were shaking too badly to aim, but I didn't care. I just wanted distance between me and it. He kept coming. Slow. Controlled. Not attacking, just approaching. I grabbed the only thing left within reach. The half-full can of my dad's homemade chili. In a panic, I ripped the lid off and slid it across the floor. The man stopped, sniffed the air, then dropped his face into the can. He didn't eat it. He inhaled it. One disgusting slurp after another until it was empty, and, even then, he licked the inside with long, dragging strokes of his tongue. I thought I was gonna throw up, but I stayed quiet, still, watching. When he finally looked up again, his face was dripping with beans and grease. His tongue lolled out of his mouth, twitching slightly, and then he started crawling toward me again. I realized in that moment, he wasn't done. He was still hungry, and I had nothing else to give. This time, I didn't wait. I bolted for the door, rifle in one hand, using the other to shove the creature aside. His skin was cold and slick like raw meat. He let out a sound somewhere between a moan and a giggle as I pushed past him. I didn't stop to see if he followed. I just ran. Out of the blind, through the trees. My lungs burned. My legs felt like lead. But I didn't look back. Not once. I burst out of the woods like a madman, crashing through bushes, twigs scraping my arms and legs. My boots slammed the dirt as I sprinted across the field behind my parents' ranch house. When I finally stumbled up the porch steps, I collapsed against the door, gasping for air. My hand shook as I fumbled for the handle. For a moment, I thought I was going to pass out. Inside, everyone was awake. My kids were eating breakfast. My wife was chatting with her dad. Her mother gave me a look like I'd just crawled out of a dumpster. "You okay?" she said with a smirk. "You look like hell." I ignored her and stumbled toward the kitchen sink, splashing cold water on my face. My heart still thudded like a war drum. Jay, my brother-in-law, raised an eyebrow. Dude, what happened? You go on some kind of ultra marathon out there? I turned to them, breathless. There was something out in the woods. They all went quiet. I was in the blind, and this guy, he wasn't right. He looked homeless, but he acted like an animal. He broke into my blind, and he started eating. Like a dog. You mean, like some survivalist dude? Jay asked. I shook my head. No. I mean, he didn't talk. He didn't act human. He crawled on all fours. He licked the food off the floor like it was the only thing he'd had in days. His skin was gray, slimy. His eyes were bloodshot, but wide. And he smiled. A lot. There was silence. Then my wife's mom laughed. "You've really got a vivid imagination," she said. "Maybe you were just having a nightmare." I was awake, I snapped, louder than I meant to. The kids froze, staring at me. My wife put a hand on my arm. "Okay, calm down," she said gently. "Maybe it..." Back at the ranch, I didn't say much. Everyone was treating me like I'd had a heat stroke or some kind of episode. I didn't blame them. Even I started wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. Until that night, when I heard the same wet, gurgling sound just outside my window. I woke up, drenched in sweat. At first, I thought it was just a nightmare. That same horrible laugh the wet, gargling, guttural heaving echoed faintly in my ears. But then I realized it wasn't in my head. It was coming from outside my window. I froze, barely breathing. My room was still pitch dark, the soft whir of the ceiling fan the only normal sound. I slowly reached for my phone and tapped the screen. 3:17 a.m. The sound came again. Closer, more deliberate. Hoo! H. Herc. H. That same animal-like choking, like someone trying to vomit and laugh at the same time. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could and crawled to the window. My hands trembled as I pulled back the curtain just a fraction. Outside, at the edge of the tree line behind the ranch house, I saw it. The figure was there, just standing. His body pale in the moonlight. No clothes, now just skin. Stretched thin across bone. The same misshapen silhouette I'd seen crouched in the blind. Even from a distance, I could see his mouth wide open in a grin. Gums raw and glistening, his eyes locked directly on my window. He didn't move. Not even a sway. He just watched. I stepped back from the window, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I had to wake someone up. I rushed into the hallway and banged on the guest room door. Jay opened up, groggy, hair messy. "Dude, it's like 3:30 what?" "Come here," I whispered sharply. Just look out the window." Still half asleep, he followed me down the hall and peeked out. His eyes narrowed. Then he stiffened. "Is that a person?" he whispered. "Yes. Why the hell is he naked?" "I don't know." We stared for another few seconds, and then the figure moved. He didn't walk. He lurched forward, like a puppet with tangled strings. Then he dropped onto all fours. Jay gasped. "What the..." "Don't make a sound," I hissed. The thing galloped a few feet toward the house, then suddenly stopped. It tilted its head, sniffing the air just like a dog would. Its limbs twitched unnaturally, like it was fighting its own body. That's when I noticed the long smear across its side. Something dark, like dried blood. "Call the sheriff," I said. "Right now." Jay didn't argue. He pulled out his phone and ducked into the hallway. Meanwhile, I stayed at the window, eyes locked on the thing as it crept toward the porch. Then it stood up again, full height, bony shoulders hunched. It walked right up to the screen door. For a second, I thought it was going to try and open it, but it didn't. It just leaned forward and licked the screen. One long, slow, greasy smear. Then it started laughing. That same sound. The wet, hoarse, hollow cackle that made my blood freeze in my veins. I backed away, my stomach churning. Then it stopped. It turned its head slowly toward the living room camera. The one pointed at the porch. It knew. And just like that, it turned and disappeared into the trees. By the time the sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, the thing was long gone. There were no footprints, no smudges on the screen door. Nothing on the camera like it glitched right as he appeared. They searched the woods, again and again, but nothing. I was left trying to convince everyone I wasn't insane, but I knew what I saw, and it wasn't human. The next day, I barely spoke during breakfast. My wife noticed, of course. "Did you even sleep last night?" "No," I said. "Jay and I saw something." Jay looked up from his plate, gave me a look that said, "Don't go there," but I went there anyway. "I think there's someone living out in those woods." "Someone dangerous." Her parents, especially her mother, scoffed. "You and your wild ideas. Maybe lay off the whiskey at night." Jay cut in. "No, seriously. We saw a guy, naked, gray skin, acting like an animal." My wife's dad leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "You boys go hunting near that south patch by the gulch?" We nodded. He scratched his beard. "Well, you're not the first ones to say they've seen something out there." That got my attention. "What do you mean?" He glanced at my wife's mom, who gave him an annoyed shake of the head. He ignored her. "Back in the 80s, when I was about your age, there was a man who lived off-grid deep in those woods. Used to trap animals, sell pelts. Real strange fella. Folks called him Grayson, or just Gray, because of how sickly and pale he looked. He lived in a shack near the ravine. One day, someone found his place burned to the ground. Thought he died in it." "Did they find a body?" I asked. "Nope, just blood. A lot of it." Jay blinked. "And they never found him?" "Disappeared. But people farmers, hikers swore they saw him later. Said he looked even worse. Gray as ash, naked, moving like a damn wolf. Thought it was just backwoods superstition." I stared at him, stunned. "So, you think it's the same guy?" "I don't know what the hell you saw, but if it was him, he ain't right." His wife snorted. "You're encouraging them. There's no ghoul in the woods. Probably just a drug addict." "Maybe," her husband said, but his eyes didn't say maybe. Later that day, I went to the sheriff's office again. I told them everything in detail. The screen licking, the way it moved, the guttural laugh. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Just sat in the kitchen with the lights off, the rifle across my lap, staring at the back door like it might swing open at any second. When morning finally arrived, Jay came by, pale as a ghost. Before I could say anything, he pulled something out of his pocket, a crumpled piece of paper with dirt stains and something that looked like dried blood on it. He flattened it on the table. One word, scratched over and over again in shaky, messy handwriting: more. Jay said he found it on his car windshield. No footprints around. Nothing on the security cam either. That same day, we went back to the hunting blind in daylight. Jay didn't want to. I didn't either. But something was eating away at me. We needed to know what it was. Everything was as we'd left it. The broken stove, the spilled food, but now there were scratches in the wood all around the doorframe, deep, wide gouges, like something clawed at it in a frenzy. There was one other thing. In the dirt behind the blind, we found drag marks. Like something big had crawled back into the woods. I swear they looked like handprints. Long, dragging fingers gouging into the earth. We followed them. They led deeper into the forest to a place we'd never been before. That's when we saw it. A shack. Half buried in the overgrowth, made of warped old planks, like it had been standing there for decades. A broken stovepipe jutted from the roof. The door was open, swinging gently on rusted hinges. Jay stopped. We shouldn't go in. But I already had. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of rot and mold. Piles of bones in the corners, not animal bones. Something told me these weren't deer. A filthy mattress in the corner. Torn cloth hanging like curtains. Scattered around the floor were cans, wrappers, and scratched into the walls, over and over. More. We heard something crash outside. Ran out in time to see a shadow dart between trees. We didn't chase it. We ran. That night, I tried to convince my wife to leave. Take the kids. Go back to the city, she argued. Said I was being paranoid. So I showed her the paper Jay found, told her everything. She didn't believe me, but she left anyway. Said she couldn't stand my behavior, that I was unraveling. Maybe I was. Or maybe I was finally waking up to what this place really was. That night, I stayed up again. This time, I left food outside. Not just trail mix. I opened a can of chili, left it on a plate beside a flashlight. Then I turned off all the lights and waited. Around 2:47 a.m., I heard it. Not the shuffling footsteps, not the grunting, or the heaving laughter like before. This time it was a whisper, low, ragged, almost like breath dragging across a torn throat. More. I stayed in the dark, my rifle across my lap, eyes glued to the back porch through the slightly parted blinds. The flashlight I'd left outside was still on, its beam pointed at the plate of food. The chili was untouched. The trees swayed gently in the breeze. Nothing unusual. Until he stepped into view. Same figure from the blind. Same rotten skin. Same slick gray film over his body like he had been soaking in sewage. He crouched slowly, bones cracking audibly with the motion, and picked up the can. Not with hands with his mouth, like a feral dog. He tore into the chili, swallowing the contents whole in seconds, licked the inside with long, wet strokes, then dropped it on the ground with a clatter. He looked up, right at me. Even though I was in the dark and barely breathing, he saw me. His eyes didn't glow like an animal's. They were pale, mismatched, and somehow full of hunger, not just for food, but for something deeper. I stepped back from the window, heart hammering, and then I heard the door handle jiggle. Not violently, not aggressively, just a little metallic click, like a knock you weren't meant to hear. I raised my rifle and aimed at the door. Nothing happened. 5 minutes passed. 10. I peeked out again. He was gone. But where the chili can had been, there was a folded piece of paper, soaked through with what looked like grease and blood. I waited until morning to grab it, unfolded it with gloves. 3 words, scribbled in that same frantic handwriting. Come to me. I called Jay, told him what happened, told him about the shack, about the thing, about the invitation. He didn't even hesitate. I'll be at your place in an hour. We packed supplies, flashlights, food, weapons, backup batteries, and a body cam I used for outdoor filming. I didn't know if we were dealing with a monster, a man, or something worse. But I knew one thing for sure. It was waiting for us. We reached the shack around noon the next day. The sun was high, but it did little to cut through the gloom in the woods. Jay walked ahead, his hand firmly on the handle of his machete. I had my rifle slung across my chest, and the body cam strapped to my shoulder was blinking red, recording every moment. The clearing looked smaller now, more enclosed, as if the forest itself had crept inward. The shack was just as I'd left it, if not worse. The wood looked darker, wetter, and the smell that poured out from it was unbearable, like rotten meat and moldy earth mixed together. Jay stepped onto the warped porch and peered through the crack in the door. Jesus, he whispered. I moved beside him. Inside, the shack was filled with bones. Not deer bones, not small animal skeletons. Human-sized, dozens of them. Some arranged in circles, others stacked in corners. Some freshly gnawed the marrow, still wet and dark. On the far wall, carved deep into the wood with jagged strokes, was a phrase repeated over and over. It feeds. Jay turned to me. We shouldn't be here. I agreed. But before we could back away, something heavy shifted behind the shack. Branches cracked, leaves rustled, and then came the grunt. That horrible, throatless heaving grunt. Jay motioned for me to stay low. We ducked beneath the broken window, eyes fixed on the back of the shack. Then we saw it. Not the creature, not fully, but something tall, thin, naked. Its skin hung loose and mottled. It moved on all fours, but in jerky, unnatural spasms, like its bones didn't quite fit. It sniffed the air, then paused. its head turned sharply directly toward us. Even from behind the wall, even from the shadows, it knew we were there. Jay grabbed my arm and mouthed, "Run." But I couldn't. Something about it held me there, rooted me to the ground, like I was being pulled into its hunger. Jay yanked me hard, and we stumbled backward into the brush just as the shack's door was flung open. The thing lunged into the clearing, letting out a gurgling howl that didn't sound human or animal. Just wrong. We ran, full sprint, crashing through the woods. Behind us, we could hear it tearing through the underbrush. Howling, snarling, laughing, Jay shouted, "Don't stop!" Head for the stream. We broke through the tree line, feet slamming into the rocky bank, and jumped across just as the thing burst from the trees. It stopped at the water, watching, shaking. Its head cocked sideways, like it didn't understand why we'd escaped. Then, it grinned. That same gummy, toothless grin I'd seen before. And it whispered, "Come back, hungry." Jay and I didn't stop running until we reached the truck. Every shadow along the trail felt alive, every snapping twig made my blood freeze. But we didn't see the thing again. Not that day. Back at the ranch, we locked the doors, covered the windows, and just sat there, staring at each other. Neither of us said anything for a long time. What could we say? We had seen something that shouldn't exist. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing its grin, the way it crawled, the way it laughed while licking food off the floor like an animal. I rewatched the body cam footage. At first, nothing. Static, then a blur at the edge of the frame. Then, it. The creature was on all fours, crawling just behind the shack. No face, just skin stretched too tightly, like it had once worn someone else's. And its eyes, if you could call them, that were just sunken black pits. I paused the video. It wasn't just behind the shack. It was looking at the camera, like it knew I was watching, like it knew I would come back. That night, I decided something. I wasn't going to hunt there anymore. I wasn't going to go back. But Jay, he wasn't the same after that. A few weeks later, he messaged me. "Bro, I can't stop dreaming about it. I need to go back. Just once. Just to see." I begged him not to. I told him what I saw in the footage. He didn't respond. 2 days later, his truck was found parked near that same dirt path. The sheriff said it looked like he had just walked into the woods. Jay's boots were still on the trail, neatly placed side by side. He never came back. They searched the area for days. Dogs, helicopters, nothing. The only thing they found? A trail mix wrapper torn to shreds lying just outside the shack, and scratched into the dirt nearby were the words, "Still hungry." I moved out of state after that, haven't hunted since. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear that horrible, dry laugh, like it's right outside the window. And sometimes, I wonder if Jay is still out there, crawling, eating, grinning,